Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another CAST Meet the Expert session. Today we are thrilled to feature Dr. Gray Turnage, Assistant Research and Extension Professor at Mississippi State University. But before we start, I wanted to share some exciting news. CAST has a lot of great things planned for next year. We're launching a lot of new programs designed to give you more opportunities to learn, connect, and grow. And you might already know some of them because they were on your screen, but just want to share and explain a little bit more about some of them. So CAST is changing, and for next year, we're implementing a lot of changes to the way that we communicate with people, communicate with members, the programs that we offer as benefits to our valued members, and more ways for our volunteers to engage with us. These are some of the programs that we have for next year. They will start being launching. Will start being launched in January 1st, and then will be launched during the first trimester of 2026. We have a lot of new things. For example, CAST Labs, which are innovation short time labs where we're gonna launch some summaries, infographics, video series, documentaries, something like that. CAST Academy, which is a learning platform for CAST where people can get certification on several new skills. And then we have CAST Studio with podcasts, video series, a lot of new newsletters. Some of them are to connect with our students, with more policymakers, and with some other members. And now we also have something that is more shaped to convene and engage with the community. We'll keep our annual meeting, our Student Innovation Conference, but now with our new awards, new webinars, new summit series, we wanted to be more present in our members' lives. So there's a lot of new things. If you want to know more about CAST programs, there's a lot of more opportunities for you to learn and engage. Just go to our webpage, to our website, cast-science.org, and just check our new programs over there. And if you're not a member, please become a member so you can help us shape those programs and also shape what CAST's future. So if you're not a member, just use the QR code to become a member today. It's pretty cheap for individual new members, so please do that. That will help us a lot. So I want to bring onto screen our programs and engagement manager, Kaylee Kleitch. She will talk and introduce our guests for today. Hello, Kaylee.
Hey, Carlos. Thanks for the little intro. And welcome again to everybody. Today's Meet the Expert. We're thrilled to feature Dr. Gray Turnage, Assistant Research and Extension Professor at Mississippi State University. So Gray specializes in aquatic plant management and cutting-edge remote sensing technologies, including the use of drones and autonomous surface vessels for environmental monitoring. His work is helping advance methods for mapping invasive species, improving water quality, and applying innovative tools to protect wetlands and freshwater ecosystems. We're excited to learn from his expertise and hear about his professional journey. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Ryan Wursel. Dr. Wursel is an associate professor and MS program coordinator at the Department of Biological Sciences at Minnesota State University, Mankato. He brings extensive experience in aquatic plant management, lake ecology, and weed science, and we're really excited to have him guide today's discussion. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ryan Wursel.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me, Kaylee. All right, we're just waiting for Dr. Turnage's slides to load up. And for those of you that don't know, Dr. Turnage and I go back several years. I'm actually a graduate from the Mississippi State University Weed Science program, and I helped develop the aquatic weed lab there at Mississippi State under the direction of Dr. John Madsen back in the early 2000s. And Gray came in and we overlapped a little bit on my way out to other things. And Gray has really done a wonderful job at picking up the reins and keeping that lab going and making it into an international aquatic plant management, wetland research type lab, and has really done a wonderful job at integrating a lot of the unmanned aircraft and geospatial aspects into that lab and has really moved it into a new direction. So we're really excited today to hear what Gray has done and kind of his insights as to where he sees this field going here in the next 5 to 10 years. So with that, Gray, I'll turn it over to you to give us an introduction.
Thank you, Dr. Wurzel, for that kind introduction. And thank you, CAST. I definitely appreciate the opportunity to get on this platform and to speak and to talk about aquatics and aquatic plant problems. Most folks that know me, if you give me a few minutes, I'm going to start talking about them and the issues we face. So most folks have learned to just sort of not give me that opportunity because I know I'll go forever. But I want to give a little background on how I got here today, my professional journey and this journey here with CAST. So I'm a member of the Aquatic Plant Management Society, which is an international organization. It's based in the U.S., but we have a global scope. And since 2023, I have been their representative to CAST. I've served on the board of directors at the APMS. I chair some of their committees, and I've actually been active in some of their regional chapters here in the U.S. I've been very fortunate that they asked me to work with CAST and to be their rep there. And within CAST, I work with what's called the Plant Agriculture and Environmental Issues Work Group, which was formerly the Plant Working Group. Within that working group, we have a group of weed scientists that meets quarterly to biannually. And Dr. Jill Schroeder suggested that I volunteered to do this Meet the Expert series, and I was happy to do it, happy for the opportunity. If you don't know much about CAST, I would encourage you to check out their website, look at the initiatives they have going on. It's a great group of folks, great opportunities there for up and coming students. Definitely check out what they've got going on. I would encourage all of you to do that. So moving now into slide 2, please. My professional journey here. I'm a native of the Mississippi Gulf Coast. You'll see as I go through here, I never ventured too far from home professionally, but I've worked quite extensively in the U.S. In my younger years, I spent a lot of time in the Gulf Coast, in the Mississippi Sound and the Northern Gulf. That's the body of water right off our coastline there. Anytime I could get out on the water, I wanted to do that. If I was up inland visiting family, I tried to be around freshwater as much as I could. I was always fascinated by aquatic and wetland ecosystems and the organisms that lived in them. After high school and in my college years, I spent a few years doing seasonal work. I worked in the medical sector for a little while. I worked in natural resource management and forestry and wetland consulting. But I was always drawn back to fields that had a life or natural sciences focus, predominantly outdoors if I could get there. I am definitely what you'd call an atypical student. I dropped out of college for a little while, started a family, decided that a low-paying job was not quite for me. So went back to college to finish my bachelor's degree. Finished that in 2008 at Mississippi State in biological sciences, then shifted gears into a master's degree, also at Mississippi State and also in biological sciences. You might be detecting a theme here that I stayed at Mississippi State. Towards the end of my master's degree, like Dr. Wurzel said, I hired into Dr. John Madsen's lab as one of his research associates. And I was exposed to a lot more of the applied sciences in that role, and I was grateful for that. Prior to that, I'd been more of a theoretical lab, which I learned a lot there, but it just wasn't my cup of tea. Moving into the applied sciences was really meshed well with my personality and my personal goals. Dr. Madsen encouraged all of his staff to work extensively on his projects across the United States. One of the things I think he wanted us to learn was that regardless of where you go, people's problems are very similar. So anywhere we worked, we saw a lot of the same problems. But we were also exposed to how they manage those problems, and we saw different styles of management. For us, that really broadened our horizons and our experiences. And as we were moving out of our degrees, we were more marketable, I guess you'd say, as we were looking for jobs because we had worked all over the country in most cases. Dr. Madsen left MSU in 2014 for a job with USDA. But even after he left, he always encouraged me to continue in aquatics. He was a great mentor, is a great mentor, he's still around, a great friend. And anytime I needed him for anything, he was more than happy to pick up the phone and to encourage me. Dr. Wursel as well. He was been a great colleague. Others along the way have helped me, encouraged me. And I would encourage you students that are listening to reach out and to network as much as you can. Those connections, like mine with Drs. Madsen and Wursel, are going to be critical as you move through your careers. You definitely need to know your subject area, but if there's anything I could lay on you in addition to your technical expertise, is to network as much as possible. The more people you know, that's the more people that can help you as you move through your careers. Dr. Madsen encouraged me to pursue a PhD right after he left. I did that with a guy named Dr. John Bird. He was my PhD advisor. And I worked on a plant called Flowering Rush up in Minnesota, of all places. So for 3 years, 3 times a year, I was driving up to Minnesota to check my research plots. That was a great program we had at Mississippi State called Tuition Remission, where staff members can work on their degree simultaneously, and the university will pay for those credits up to 6 hours a semester. So when I say I was an atypical student, that's what I mean. I was actually working for the university while pursuing a degree simultaneously. We figured out how to control flowering rush in Minnesota, which was great. It really went a long way towards our resource management partners up there. Helped them shift focus from flowering rush to other emerging issues they had. As I wrapped up my degree, I was hired to my current position here at Mississippi State as an assistant research and extension professor. And I've continued to grow our aquatics program here. All of our research focuses on biology, ecology, and management of aquatic resources, primarily aquatic vegetation. We don't just focus on management of invasive species, although that is a large chunk of what we do. We focus more on the restoration and the proper stewardship of aquatic resources. Management of our invasive species is just the first step in restoration initiatives. I try to get that through to my students as often as I can, that management of the invasive is not the end goal. It's just one step in the process. For those of you that have not heard of aquatic plant management or aquatic weed science, it's probably the smallest of the weed science fields, but it impacts many of our day-to-day lives. Many aspects of society can be impacted by aquatic plants and harmful algae that we have in our aquatic resources. If you value clean drinking water and availability, if you value constant power production, keeping your lights on, your heat on, your refrigerator on, then you might want to perk up and listen to some of the issues we're dealing with in the latter half of this talk. Aquatic weeds and some of the problems they cause can also impact row crops. So they can impact livestock production, turf grass irrigation, recreational opportunities, commercial and military boat navigation, and they can also impact disease vectors. And that's something I want to stop on for a second, is the navigation and the disease vectors. Next slide, please. So this plant here on the left is water hyacinth. It's sometimes referred to as a beautiful monster. It has a long history with the Aquatic Plant Management Organization and aquatic weed science. This is easily the most managed aquatic plant in the world. In the United States, it moved into our country in the 1880s. It was brought in at the World's Fair and Cotton Expo in New Orleans, Louisiana. It was brought in to showcase it as a plant for the water garden industry. You can see those really nice, pretty purple inflorescences there. That's what made it popular as a nursery plant. It's also very easy to culture. You don't have to give it a lot of love to keep it alive. Somebody took that home to Florida. They released it into a canal. And within about 20 years, it had moved into the St. Johns River, into the port of Jacksonville, Florida, and stopped up that port. They couldn't get international shipping traffic in and out of our country. They had a lot of goods riding on docks and riding at ships at anchor at sea. And the U.S. Congress passed an act called the River and Harbors Act that mandated the Army Corps of Engineers keep our nation's waterways open for military and commercial navigation. It all stemmed back from this plant. So if you hear about Army Corps regulations around water and wetland permitting, a lot of it stems all the way back to this plant here. Fast forward a few decades into Florida, this plant was still around. It was still causing problems. to the point that they were able to tie a lot of insect-borne disease to the habitats this plant had infested. It would take flowing systems or systems that had a lot of wind and wave activity, and it would attenuate those waves, and these systems would become stagnant. They'd become perfect mosquito breeding habitat, which caused an increase in mosquito-borne diseases in Florida. From that, an organization was formed to manage this plant, which was called the Hyacinth Control Society. It was formed in the 1960s. They were very successful. After a few years, they realized water hyacinth wasn't the only plant that needed some focus, so they rebranded into the Aquatic Plant Management Society, which I'm a member of and I mentioned earlier. Within the Aquatic Plant Management Society, there's 7 regional chapters here. I wanted to highlight those. So if you have an interest in aquatics and you want to get involved, here is a professional organization and its sub-chapters that you can easily tap into. They love students. They're very good about taking care of students. If you go to their meetings and present, they usually cover your hotel room, which is great. But it's not just made up of academics. It's made up of government researchers, nonprofit organizations, manufacturers, consultants, resource managers, private stakeholders, you name it. There's a very broad demographic of members there. And similar to CAST, this is a great organization to get involved with. It's been a great partnership between APMS and CAST. Dr. Boomsma, that leads CAST, actually came to the APMS national meeting last summer. We had a great little session on HABs that he participated in. So excellent group to get involved with. I'd encourage any of you to check it out if you want. Next slide, please. So what's the difference in aquatic and terrestrial weed scientists? I put a list up here for both, and this is not exhaustive by any means, but most of your weed scientists are going to have a core set of skills. Now, from biochemistry, statistics, botany, you may need to know a little bit about economy and economic principles. And like our terrestrial counterparts, we have no idea what hat we're going to have to put on that day. My children are a fan of Harry Potter, and they love this scene about the sorting hat, putting the kids into different houses. I feel like when I come to work some days, I'm going to have to put on my sorting hat and figure out which one of these fields I'm going to have to operate in that day. And usually it's hour to hour. You're going to field phone calls that ask you to have, you may have a statistics question at one point or a biology question at the next. Our terrestrial counterparts, they have a lot more background in agronomy or forage principles or livestock management than we will. In aquatics, our subfields that we have to really hone in on are limnology, fishery scientists, hydrology, phycology, the study of algae. And some of us that have states that border saltwater systems, we may have to know a good bit about our estuarine and marine science. So I would encourage each of you students that are listening, take as many courses as you can, talk to as many people as you can. You never know when you're going to need that skill set from that class, but it will be invaluable one day when you're talking to stakeholders. Next slide, please. So within aquatics, we have a lot of ongoing and emerging issues that I wanted to touch on. And I wanted to showcase these species because, one, they're very problematic in the Southeast, but two, I wanted you to just get an idea of the scope and the scale of some of these that we have to deal with. These are primarily the species that are the hot topics in the southeastern U.S. They are by no means restricted to the Southeast, and people outside the Southeast are still working on them in the U.S. In fact, some of these I'm working on with researchers in other countries. They are not restricted just to the United States. But I'm hoping that with this slide, you'll see the scope and scale of some of these problems and get the understanding that they are not going away. I've already touched on water hyacinth and just how widespread it is and how it's really been a driver in a lot of what we do in aquatics. It is easily the most managed aquatic plant in the world. It's present on 6 of our 7 continents, Antarctica being the one that we haven't found it on. Right next to it here is hydrilla. In the southeastern U.S., hydrilla is king. It is probably more managed than even water hyacinth. And that's because the plant grows so aggressively, it can outcompete just about everything around it, and it has multiple modes of reproduction. It's one of those, you manage it, and in a few months, you're going to be back on the same site managing it again. There's no shortage of issues with it. There's dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of water bodies across the United States that are infested with this plant. So it's not going away, and it impacts all of the drinking water and aquatic resources I mentioned earlier. If you name a use of water, this plant probably impacts it in some way. Right beside it, there is Phragmites. That is what we call it. It's a native species in the U.S., but there are invasive haplotypes in the country. So think of haplotypes for the purpose of this discussion as subspecies. I love to show this image of it so people can get an idea of how impactful it can be, how dense it grows. In that image, you may see a man standing there. What's hard to determine is that he's actually standing on a kayak floating in 4 feet of water, and he's got 5 or 6 feet of vegetation over his head. So that's how dense and how rough that plant can be. It really disrupts nutrient cycling and ecological processes in marsh environments, particularly the movement of nutrients from an aquatic to a terrestrial ecosystem. And just like hydrilla, it has multiple modes of reproduction. It's very hard to kill, very hard to manage. Usually when you manage a site, you're going to be back there on it again a few months to maybe a year later. The next species over is alligator weed. This one is a poster child for how aquatic weeds can turn around, or any weed can turn around when you think you've got them sort of controlled and just come rearing back. In the 1970s and 60s, we developed biocontrol agents that were pretty effective at containing this plant in the southeastern U.S. But here in the last few decades, the plant has actually outgrown or extended its range beyond where those biocontrol agents can live. And so now we're having to revisit the management of the species, which is why I also have it down below in the next section on emerging weeds. We now have to go back and look for new ways to control this plant beyond its traditional range where the biocontrol is effective. We've also found that there are at least 6 subspecies or haplotypes of this plant in the country, in the U.S., which suggests 6 separate introductions. But then also we have some limited evidence that suggests these haplotypes respond differently to control strategies. So each of these haplotypes might have to have its own unique management plan drawn up for it, which is a huge problem for some of our local resource managers that may not have access to the resources to actually drill down on which haplotype they're dealing with. Jumping all the way back to the left, this is eelgrass. These are 5 distinct taxa. 2 are native, 3 are invasive. And they are rapidly spreading in our southern reservoirs. They are really impacting, in particular, drinking water systems and hydropower and nuclear power generation systems. They plug up water intakes to where our resource managers can't get enough water in to cool their plants or to push drinking water into its plant for processing. So that problem's not going away anytime soon. Next to that is Cuban bulrush. This is a great example of an ecosystem engineer. That image looks like a pasture, but it is not. That is a floating island. That is hundreds of acres of floating island. I took that photo on Orange Lake in Florida. There's 5 or 6 feet of water under that floating island, and it's all dead water. There's no light penetration through that plant canopy, so there's no way that submerged plants or algae can grow under there and produce dissolved oxygen for our fish and other aquatic fauna to survive. So what would be great habitat for fisheries is just dead water. So another problem species there. To the far right is giant salvinia. This is one of our newer invaders in the United States. And it's in the southeast for now. We want to keep it that way. But this plant can double its biomass in about 48 hours on a hot day. So it's a great example of a species that you can look at in one day and think there's not much of a problem, and come back a week later and wonder where all the growth came from. Similar to Cuban bulrush, it forms these huge floating mats that just shade out everything underneath. Very problematic for the ecology of a system, but also, again, for human uses of a system. All of these species are capable of harboring disease-carrying organisms and shifting an open water habitat to a still water habitat that is not good for human uses of some of our water systems. Next slide, please. All right, so I talked about the problems there that we have there. I wanted to touch on this for students or anyone else, that there are opportunities in aquatic plant management if it's something you're interested in. There are graduate programs all over the country. I have one here at Mississippi State. Dr. Wursel has one in Minnesota. And they all have their own little unique flavor of what they work on. Some work on genetics, some work on management initiatives. My team, like Carlos and Kaylee mentioned earlier, we do a good bit of drone work here. We work mostly with drone technology to identify plants on the landscape and then use them as a management tool. We work with a lot of control techniques here, looking at how to manage some of these plants, the invasives, and then, like I mentioned earlier, restore the natives. But others are very focused on extension initiatives. Some may be focused on more of a fisheries bent. How are these plants impacting fish production? But there's a lot of opportunity all over the country if this is something you're interested in. If you're wrapping up your graduate program, there's job opportunities out there as well. Most of our folks either end up in government agencies or that can be federal or state. They end up in research. I myself took that path. I'm a research extension professor, as mentioned earlier. There are also research jobs in government agencies. The Army Corps of Engineers has a great program. USDA ARS has at least 2 people that I know of, one in California and one in Florida, that work on management and research related to aquatic plants. There's regulatory jobs, there's industry. You can go work for an applicator, you can be a consultant. In fact, some of the consulting firms these days are starting to hire researchers as well, people with advanced degrees. And then you can work for manufacturers or NGOs. There's a lot of jobs in this field that are available for anybody that wants to take them. And because we have no shortage of problems, like you saw on the last slide, these will be pretty stable jobs for quite a while. There's new plants coming into our country all the time, new things to work on. Like I mentioned with the drones, there's always new tools that need to be understood. And then how to utilize those for management needs to be carried down to our stakeholders so that they can use them effectively and not feel like they're just spinning their wheels when somebody shows them a new tool. Our work with drones, that's been a big component of our work with drones here at Mississippi State, is working with stakeholders through our extension program to show them how to fit that into their management strategies. Next slide. I think I'll stop here and move into questions. If we have any, I wanted to throw this slide up in case anybody wanted to get in touch with me. Here's my office phone and my email. Email's for sure the best way to get a hold of me. I'm rarely in my office. But that's all I have there. So I guess, yeah, let's take some questions.
Well, Gray, thanks for that overview. You mentioned networking, and you gave some good opportunities for jobs in the field. For the students that are watching, how does one get a start in the field of aquatic plant management, right? I mean, it's hard to network and build your professional, friendships without having that first step. So what would you recommend as being that first step if you're, maybe an undergrad looking for what it is, the meaning of my life, what do I want to do? Or maybe I've got my undergraduate degree and I want to go on to graduate school, right? So what would be that next step? How do I get involved in APM?
So, excuse me. The quickest way would be to email me or yourself, Dr. Wursel, and we can link people up with opportunities that may fit their desires or their sort of focus on where they want their career to go. Probably the best thing though to network with a lot of people simultaneously would be to show up at one of those regional chapter meetings for the Aquatic Plant Management Society or at the parent organization, the National APMS. They have a great group there that takes care of students. They have a lot of student initiatives to help you network with your own colleagues, but also with the people that are actively doing research and management. I myself I've been a huge proponent of taking my own students to those meetings, and many of them have left those meetings with job offers or job interviews in hand. So that is where I would start, would be getting involved with those organizations. You can certainly also reach out to CAST. They know how to get a hold of people in our field in aquatics, but also other fields that maybe more the flavor a student is looking for.
So when a student gets their foot in the door or they're in a university setting, what sorts of experiences would you recommend them pursuing? I mean, what skills would be, kind of quintessential to develop as you work towards that that final career?
I would certainly look for professors that have research opportunities, get involved with their labs. If you leave your undergrad with some sort of research experience, it is going to make other professors more likely to take you on for a graduate program. A lot of your professors that encourage undergrad research as well, they have a pretty good pulse on the field, who's active, who's not, who's hiring, which organizations may focus more on fisheries or aquatic plant management or water quality management, and they can help link you up with those correct groups. But the first thing I would say, is look for somebody doing research at your university and ask if you can join their lab as a volunteer, an intern, preferably a paid internship would be even better, to help you start making those connections and start moving into the field. I would also encourage students to take classes that you know that may be important to that field that you may or may not have had on your program of study. Think a little bit outside the box, get comfortable with a little bit of discomfort. I had to take some organic chemistry courses. I hated that course. I hated both of those courses, but it was something necessary that I needed. And it's something that I actually use more often today than I thought I would. So I would definitely encourage you to look at what skill sets you're going to have in the job you want. And then regardless of how tough it is, just buckle down and do it.
Well, as far as that, the coursework and the research, I think I've seen it here at my institution where we get undergrads in and they're so bogged down and they're so scared they're going to make the wrong decision, right? So if I go into this professor's lab or I take this course that, I'm stuck, I'm pigeonholed. In your experience, have you seen that where if I go down here and I want to, I've gone down the terrestrial, weed management track, am I stuck, right? Am I going to go be a non-row crop right of way, or am I going to be this type of researcher? Or are the skills that are developed and learned in these programs, can you, cross discipline and go back and forth if you've got an open mindset?
So I've got a lot to say there. I'll try to keep it limited. I myself did that. I in my undergrad years, I played a lot where I shouldn't have, and ended up switching majors a few times. But I'm living proof that you can go down the wrong trail and backtrack your way out and move along. I initially wanted to be an engineer. And when I took the first engineering course, I realized that was not for me. So I switched over to biology. The two, I have a colleague at the University of Florida who really, I thought, put it well. He said, school is there to teach you to give you knowledge, but also to think critically. If you can think critically and think through a problem, then switching gears from one field to another should not be that hard. You should be able to pick up all that you'll need to know in that field, or at least the critical info you'll need to know in that field within the first 6 months or so on the job. And you will have some hurdles to overcome, and you will need to reach out to a few folks to get skill sets you may not be able to get right there on the job. But if you really focus on learning to think critically, to analyze a problem, identify the core of that problem, and then think your way towards a solution and act on it, then there's no reason you would be pigeonholed in a terrestrial field versus an aquatics versus some sort of hydrology. In anything that is in that field or in that sphere of influence, you should be able to shift gears pretty easily.
Okay.
Or at least that's been my experience.
I mean, I've kind of taken a similar path there as well, from the formal education that I had as a weed scientist, and now, like you, I'm exclusively in the aquatic plant realm, and being where I'm at, have kind of branched off a little bit into the harmful algal bloom and cyanobacteria realm, just because of the local needs here in Minnesota where I'm at. In addition to research, what other skills would be beneficial to develop as a student as they work through their educational career?
I would say certainly work on your people skills, your networking skills. That will serve you so well later on in your career. Learning to interact with others that may or may not have the same viewpoint as you. I've worked in other countries and they just don't approach weed science the same way we do. But learning to meet them where they are, at their point of view, being open that their point of view may be more appropriate than yours. And then trying to learn something from everybody you're around. I have great colleagues in New Zealand that they don't approach some of the same problems we have here that they also have. They don't approach it the same way. Some of that's regulatory. They just don't have access to some of the tools we do, but their programs in some ways are further along than ours. They actually have hydrilla under an eradication program, where we probably will not ever reach that goal here, but we can learn a lot from them on how they've done it. So people skills, networking, yeah.
Skills. So communication.
Communication,
both
yeah.
Written and verbal. What about things like grant writing?
Oh gosh, yes. If you're a grad student and you plan to go into academia, find a way to start writing grants. Ask your professor if you can help. Look for grants that you feel you might be able to write a good proposal to. Back to the networking, you are going to need people to help you with the administration of that grant, putting the budgets together, getting together a lot of the ancillary paperwork. Here at Mississippi State, when I write a grant, I come up with the core idea for the proposal, but that is just one piece of the overall grant packet that goes in. You have to have the budget. You have to have a lot of clauses like anti-lobbying clauses, fair hiring practices. All of that stuff has to be in that packet. You may or may not know where it's housed at your university or on what webpage, but the people in your department or your college that are there to help you with that will be able to pinpoint it immediately and get it to you. So find those people, back to the networking, get them to help you, get to know them, get them on speed dial or speed email, whatever you have. And then find those professors that write a lot of grants and ask them if you can learn from them or help them with one or two, or at least see some old ones they've written that have been funded. That goes a long way, just understanding the template and how it should be laid out. And I write a lot of grants. I think I probably write a dozen to 2 dozen a year. I could not do that without having all those people around me to help. It would not be possible if I had to do every bit of that myself.
Good. Yeah, I think that's some good advice. I think we had a comment or a question from the audience. Are you optimistic about the control of some of the ongoing aquatic weeds, especially the ones that are known to be aggressive and double back easily?
I am. I'm optimistic that we have good, knowledgeable researchers working on these problems. And more often than not, these people deliver great solutions that help our stakeholders. We have a lot of good interactions throughout our fields between research and industry and the resource managers. So when we identify a problem and we start to put together our research teams and our management teams, there's a lot of good communication going on. There's a lot of willingness to help, even when it's not necessarily your problem or in front of you. But that does give me a lot of optimism about managing some of these plants, especially some that appear to be pretty nasty players. A lot of folks are willing to help you out. They're willing to do what they can to support you and give you the resources you need to tackle them. In my own lab, we're working a lot on the eelgrass issues in the Southeast. And I feel pretty good about where we're going with that research. I have a PhD student who's top notch. He's really knocking down these projects that we have one after another. We've identified some great control strategies. We've actually started to implement some of those in Florida. And our next step will be to implement some in North Alabama. The preliminary results in Florida that we're seeing are that we've got a pretty good handle on it. And that next step is just to ramp up system-wide with operational management. So I do feel optimistic about some. Other ones kind of keep me up at night, but I know the people working on those problems, and I have a lot of faith that they're going to get the job done because I've seen them deliver on other problem species that had similar issues.
I'll play a little devil's advocate with you here, Gray.
Of course.
I mean, it's always good to be optimistic, but we're still working on things that have been in the country for 150 years, and it's still causing issues. And then we've got things like European frogbit and water soldier that are either here or knocking on the door, and Lagrosiphon, and we've got these new ones out here on the horizon. Do we have the horses to go after all of those, take care of the ones that we're working on, but then address the threats that are ever increasing that are on the horizon?
That is a great question, and it's a fair point. And it is one of the things I think that keeps a lot of us up at night in the aquatic plant field, is that we have undergone somewhat of a brain drain in the last 10 years. We've had people retire and their positions weren't refilled at universities. Some, unfortunately, have passed away much too early in their careers. They are sorely missed, personally and professionally. We definitely need their input on a lot of stuff. And it's been sort of a dwindling field for a while now. And so we have no shortage of problems. We have great researchers, very knowledgeable researchers working on those problems. But in some cases, there just aren't enough of us. The map I showed earlier, there's about a dozen programs nationwide that are really focused hard on aquatics. There's maybe another half dozen to dozen that are aquatics is something those people dabble in, but they're just not in it full bore. So yeah, we definitely need to get more people hired at more universities or other research institutions working on these problems. There's no shortage of work, but there's certainly a shortage of people, and following that, there's a shortage of funding. We do not have the budget in aquatics that a lot of our terrestrial counterparts do, mostly just because we're such a small field in the weed science world, but also because when you look at where these plants are on the landscape, they're very much, in a lot of cases, out in the middle of nowhere. So it's sort of an out of sight, out of mind thing. And it's just not, aquatic plant issues just aren't something that rise to the top of the heap very often when you have legislative bodies talking about budgets. But they are certainly problems that will be felt later on when they rise so high that they just can't be ignored anymore, particularly like one of the eelgrasses I mentioned earlier, getting into a nuclear power facility. They plugged up the water intake on a nuclear power plant in North Alabama, and they had to reduce the amount of power they could generate for, I think, 10 days to about 10% of capacity, because that's all the water they could pull in at the time to cool the reactors. And so obviously that became a problem that legislators paid attention to. But if they had paid attention 10 years before, when we said, hey, this plant's going to be a problem, and started allocating money to deal with that at that time, it never would have gotten to the point where it started to impact power generation. So we have a lack of people, but there's also a lack of funding. And we need both we need more of both to get out ahead of some of these problems that we have and some that are probably coming.
But I would agree. And I think we had another follow-up question from the audience here. Well, comment. Thank you for the great comments on students seeking out mentorship and trying different things, and that transferable skills, creative thinking, etc., are skills they want to learn. And yeah, I mean, I echo that. Those are critical skills. I mean, if you can't relate to people and can't convey your thoughts and your data in an effective manner, then we're not going to get the funding. We're not going to get the attention of the legislatures that we need. And then, what are some of the techniques you use to control invasive weeds? For pesticides, how are they applied in aquatic systems?
Oh, well, okay. So we'll start with the first half of that. Like terrestrial weed science, we have multiple categories that our control strategies fall into. We have mechanical control, which is pulling, cutting, harvesting weeds. It's physical removal or damage. We have biological control, just like terrestrial, where you use a living organism to impact your target pest. Most of ours in aquatics are fish species. Grass carp would be a great example. It's a generalist herbivore, so it's not your classical biocontrol, like where you have a targeted insect to a target species. We do have that with alligator weed and giant salvinia. We have a flea beetle and a weevil, respectively, that are very targeted to those two species. And they do provide very good suppression in the parts of the invaded range where they can survive. We also have physical control. Some might call it environmental control, where you alter the environment around these aquatic plants so they can't survive. Probably the best known example is drawdown. If you remove the water out of a system, and it's going to be pretty tough for aquatic plants to survive there. But we do have other physical control techniques, like dyeing the water to reflect or block sunlight. So your submerged plants can't grow if they don't get enough sunlight. And then chemical control, or pesticides, would be our last category there. And then we also have a lot of integrated pest management practices, where we're mixing and matching multiple control strategies to try and compound stressors on these target pests, so that you're impacting multiple physiological or metabolic pathways within the plant. It just makes it harder for it to survive. Circling back to the second half of that question about chemical control, so there are three pretty well-known application techniques in aquatics. The first being foliar spray. Just like in a terrestrial system, you calculate the number of acres or hectares, wherever you are in the world. You calibrate your spray equipment and you load it into a boat, and you go out in a boat and you apply that herbicide or that pesticide to the foliage of that plant pest. That's typically done to our emergent plants that stick up out of the water column, or like the image I have here on the screen of these floating lilies behind me. You can use it there. The second technique is what we call a submersed injection. Instead of targeting or calibrating your herbicide to a unit of area, you're calibrating it to a unit of volume. And so you're targeting a concentration of herbicide in the water in the area where the plant pest is. And so instead of talking gallons per acre, in that regard, you'd be talking gallons per acre foot, or gallons of pesticide per volume of water. We're usually, if you look on the herbicide labels, first make sure that herbicide has an aquatic section and that it's legal to use in aquatics. But you should find a table that'll have a parts per million or parts per billion concentration, the amount of gallons you need to reach that. And that should be listed on there somewhere, that target concentration that'll be needed to control your pest plant. And then the third is what we call a drip application. This is unique to flowing systems, where we're trying to get a target concentration in the water, but because the water is flowing, it makes it very hard to get the contact time with the pest plants in order to get a toxic dose in them. And so you have to calibrate your spray equipment and the amount of herbicides you need to the flow rate and the volume, or the cross section of that system you're working in. We use that drip application all over the country, but it's mostly seen in irrigation systems out in the western states, where they have plants that get into these irrigation canals, and they really hamper the ability to move water onto crops and keep them irrigated well. So we'll set up a pumping station upstream. We'll calibrate our pesticide rates to the amount of water we have moving through there, start to pump it into the canal as the water is flowing past, and we let the water deliver the pesticide to the target species as it flows by. And with some of those, you can get miles of control through those canals, through the main stem and all the laterals and tertiaries and all that.
Okay.
So
Gray, we have another follow-up to well, this was more for detection, as well as into management, but where are we in camera laser-based targeting systems, such as for land plants or seedlings?
So that's something my lab is working on. We have a grant from Army Corps of Engineers to develop a software package that works within the Esri platform to identify a suite of aquatic plant species that are pest plants on the landscape. We've been doing a good bit of that through photogrammetry and machine learning techniques over, I guess my lab's been working on it the last 10 years. I have a lot of engineering colleagues here at Mississippi State that are way more proficient in that technical side of it than I am. But we're at the point now where we can, at least in my group, we can confidently identify Phragmites on the landscape. We're pretty good at identifying water hyacinth on the landscape and alligator weed. Once we wrap up that project, we'll have probably another 10 species that we're pretty good at identifying. Some native, some non-native, but they're all pretty major players in the southeast and the northeastern U.S. There is still a long way to go with that technology and those methodologies, just due to the sheer number of photos you have to feed into those algorithms so that they can identify just one species. And you have to do it across the entire growing season of that species, the entire life cycle of that species, if you want to have any confidence in identifying it at any point in its growth cycle. So there's a lot of legwork that has to be done to develop those algorithms, but the template for that, or the protocol to develop those algorithms, is there. It's just, again, going back and finding the funding to pay for it, because it's just not cheap to develop that methodology.
Would you say it's easier to do that with terrestrial or more emergent floating vegetation than it is doing it with the submersed vegetation?
Absolutely. The aerial technology we have just does not do a good job of punching through the water column to identify those species. And then the remote sensing technology we have that works underwater, primarily sonar, just doesn't get the spatial resolution needed to distinguish one species from another. You can do a pretty good job of estimating the amount of biomass or biovolume down in that water column, but identifying one species from another is just not there yet. Not in a way that would be usable by a resource manager, I would say.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So how do you see AI and machine learning changing environmental monitoring in the next few years?
Ooh, very good question. I would be hesitant for any practitioners or any students. AI and machine learning are a powerful tool, but we need to remember that they are a tool. We need to use them responsibly. They're not going to magically do your job for you. They're not going to start doing your taxes for you, or anything, although they might. But from my own experience of using AI and machine learning to develop these plant detection and monitoring techniques, you still have to have a human in the loop that's verifying everything it tells you. Just like any other tool we have. If I go out with a sonar unit and I'm surveying a lake bottom to map the bathymetry, I'm not just assuming that sonar unit works correctly 100% of the time. I'm taking depth soundings periodically with a weight on a rope or a depth stick or something like that to validate what that sonar unit is telling me. AI and machine learning are the same way. They are going to be constrained by whoever wrote those algorithms. And you may not understand the constraints of it until you start using that technology or those techniques. And so you still have to ground truth, quote unquote, what it's telling you.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting shift or an interesting addition to the field. And, especially when we talk about automated sensors and data collection in that realm.
Again, I think it's going to be a powerful tool, a very useful tool, but it's one that we're going to have to be very careful in how we apply it and when we apply it.
Yep, I would agree. If you had unlimited resources, what big project would you love to tackle?
Retirement. No. If I had unlimited resources, I think I would love to tackle alligator weed. That plant has been in the United States over a century. In Mississippi, it is easily the most widespread aquatic plant that we have on our landscape. Not just aquatic invasive plant, aquatic plant. My team does surveys around the state for one of our state agencies every year, and we find that plant more often than any other aquatic species, any other aquatic plant species that we have, even more so than the natives. If I could find a way to get that out of our southeastern water bodies, or in California, it's out there as well. If I could find a way to get that out of our water bodies, I would call that a win when I do go to retirement one day.
Okay. Well, Gray, we're approaching the 1 hour mark. So thank you for your time today and for
Absolutely.
Giving us those insights and kind of your thoughts on the field of aquatic plant management. And thank everybody from the audience that are out there from wherever you beamed in. It was definitely some great questions and some great comments.
Yeah, thank you to you both. You had a great session today, and I think everybody really appreciated hearing your thoughts. So on that note, thank you to everybody who did join us for today's Meet the Expert session. We really appreciate your time and engagement. Remember, CAST has a lot of exciting things coming next year, so follow us on social media at CAST Ag Science and visit our website for updates. From all of us at CAST, we wish you happy holidays and a very happy 2026. Thank you again for being part of today's event, and we look forward to seeing you at our upcoming sessions.